الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. One day, about halfway into my year of study in hadith, one of my hadith teacher actually was sitting with a group of other scholars, and they were having a discussion about what is the hardest part of what they do. So it was 3 or 4 scholars of hadith. They were sitting together. One of them was a teacher of Bukhari, one of them a teacher of Abu Dawood, etc. And they were sitting together and they were discussing what's out of their job. You know, this is their full-time job. This is what they do. They teach people all day. All of them were imams in different masjids. So they were sitting between themselves and just talking about what's the hardest thing. So the Shaykh of Hadith, which is the term used to refer to the teacher who has the opportunity to teach the book of Imam Bukhari. So the Shaykh of Hadith, he actually was sitting and he said that, you know, out of all these responsibilities that we have, he said that I feel the hardest responsibility is the Jummah. Because in the Jummah, you have to give a talk. And you have to give that talk every week. And it's the same people every single week. And it's so hard to come up with a new thing every single week. Even if you repeat something from 3 years back, someone will come to you and say, oh Maulana Sahib, you gave this talk 3 years ago. Didn't you have anything new that you could think of? So people, they remember what those, especially scholars of that level, say. And so he would joke around. He would say that actually the hardest thing is not teaching hadith, it's not doing all these other responsibilities. It's actually giving the Jummah, because you have to keep giving this talk, and every week you think, okay, what am I going to say this week? What am I going to say this week? So I didn't appreciate that. You know, at that time I was sitting there and I was saying, why is he saying this? You know. He teaches hadith. That's such a huge responsibility, and especially he teaches the book of Imam Bukhari. You would think that that's the thing that weighs down upon him. Then now, coming much, much later, then you begin to recognize that when you regularly give talks, you always have to come up with something different, and it's not that easy to come up with something different. And everybody expects it to be different, something new. So, I mean, that's the same thing that all week I sit and think, okay, now what am I going to talk about on Friday? What should I talk about on Friday? So one of the things that I tend to do is that I try to see if there's, sometimes people call and ask questions or they email questions. So I sit down and think, okay, I wait and see what those emails are. And then I see if there's 2 or 3 of the same theme. And I say, okay, then why don't we just talk about that, since a couple people have asked about it. So anyway, over this past week, I got a few emails, actually 1 email and a couple phone calls, about people raising a similar issue. So I thought I would talk about it this week. And that is this whole concept of depression. So it's something that's really commonly talked about within our society. And in fact, it's something that regularly afflicts human beings by nature. And people define it differently. They call it depression. Nobody really has a definition for that term, but everybody kind of has an idea when you say that term depression, what it really means. But actually, there is a spiritual definition for depression. But in order to understand depression, you have to understand a little bit about how the human being is created. And I've talked about this before. That is that we're created out of 2 parts. If you look in hadith, the hadith clearly describes a human being has 2 processes to their creation. First is the human body. That human body is formed from a drop of fluid. And then that drop of fluid eventually divides, its cells divide, until eventually a human body is formed. And that's the shell of the human being. That's actually our shell, right? In this earth. So in this earth, in this part of our life, we have two components. We have a shell and we have a core. The shell is the body. Everything you see of the body, the skin, the bones, the hair, the teeth, that whole thing is the shell. Then separately, we have something called a core. That core is our soul. Okay, so we have a ruh, which is our soul. Now, that body has its requirements and the soul has its requirements, and both of them are emphasized in the Sharia. What the Sharia tells you, Sharia teaches you 2 things. Number 1, it teaches you what can the body do and what the body can't do. Okay? What can the body do and what the body can't do. That's halal and haram. And then it teaches you how to advance the soul, how to develop the soul. So for example, we're taught to pray, we're taught to fast, we're taught to recite the Quran, we're taught to give charity. These things have nothing to do with the body. We use the body to perform these deeds, but actually the benefit doesn't occur in the body. Now, if somebody doesn't read Quran, they're still going to grow. But if a baby doesn't drink milk, the baby's not going to grow, right? So there is some distinction there. So the body has its means of development within the Sharia, and then the soul also has its means of development within the Sharia, and both are restricted by the Sharia. For example, we are not permitted to grow the body through the use of alcohol and pork. Okay? Now those alcohol and pork have the same molecules that other foods have. Actually, molecularly, if you look at the atomic level, it's the same thing. What's in a piece of meat, in a piece of halal meat, is also in a piece of haram pork. The molecules are the same. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually delineated which things can be used to make the body grow and nourish, and which things can't be. And that's actually all done through in a means of a test. So that's the body. Then, as far as the soul is concerned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also established the means of allowing development of the soul. And that's through the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, there are other means to develop the soul. This question comes up, right? So when you meet, for example, someone from another religion, for example, you meet a Christian who's a very righteous type of Christian. You meet sometimes people like that. And they seem very spiritual. If you sit and talk to them, you relate to them, you actually even just try to discuss them, you'll see that they're sometimes very spiritual people. That doesn't mean that because they're Christian that their soul doesn't develop. It does develop to a certain degree. But it's not the permitted means of developing the soul. They do acts that allow their soul to develop. When you give charity, by nature the soul develops. Right? When you when you spend time in reflection, by nature the soul develops. But it's not the permitted way of developing the soul, according to the Sharia, because it involves some degree of shirk. And obviously shirk is not permissible, and it's despised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the results are still present in the sense that some degree of the development of the soul occurs. Now, in the case of depression, so the whole reason why I went into this background is because you have to understand this background to understand depression, at least how we define it Islamically. So in the case of depression, actually what happens is depression is an overtaking of the issues of the body and a neglect of the issues of the soul. Overemphasizing the issues of the body and neglecting the issues of the soul. This is what results in depression. What we term depression in this society. Okay? So any time there is an overemphasis on the issues of the body, because we're in this balance, right? You see that the Sharia balances the body and the soul. If the body becomes overemphasized and the aspects of the soul become depressed, that results in depression. That's what depression is. It's a depression of the soul, actually. Alright? So depression is not a depression of the body. It's a depression of the soul. Now, you think about how we emphasize things in our daily routine, right? The Sharia actually tells us how to emphasize both the body and the soul. So, for example, there were times and occasions in hadith where Sahaba came to the Prophet ﷺ and they thought that in their state of righteousness they would no longer eat, right? Or they would no longer have relations with their spouses, alright? So they came to the Prophet ﷺ explaining this as a means of righteousness, but the Prophet ﷺ said, no, this has gone too far, right? If you go that far, then you over-depress the body, and so the Prophet ﷺ said, no, your body has a right over you, right? And so then the Prophet ﷺ would raise the body so that people would not depress the body, right? And at the same time, some people would come in the opposite extreme. They would overemphasize the body and depress the soul. And then the Prophet ﷺ would teach those people to raise the soul, right, and depress the body a bit. And even within the Sharia, we have it, for example, in the month of Ramadan, right? In the month of Ramadan, we depress the body and we raise the soul. And that's the reason why we feel the way we do at the end of the month of Ramadan, because we've raised the soul and we've sufficiently depressed the body. Now that's again part of the Sharia. So you'll find throughout the Sharia that there's this balance. Anyway, what causes depression is a pushing down of the soul and overemphasis on the body. Now, you'll find that in this society there's a lot of depression. And you'll find it's because of exactly what I just laid out. Way too much emphasis on the body, right? So what do we emphasize? The clothing that we wear, and trying to wear the best clothing that we can. We have magazines advertising different types of clothing. Everywhere you go, people are advertising clothing. People talk about their clothing, etc. So that's an issue of the body, right? Where we sleep, what type of mattress, how hard the mattress is, how firm the mattress is. Now they have mattresses, one side you can set one way, one side you can set another way. All this overemphasis on the body, right? What we eat. How much do you think about our day? How much time do we put into what we eat? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner we're constantly planning. I had this yesterday for breakfast. Today I'm going to have this. Tomorrow I'm going to have that. So again, it's an emphasis on the body. So this emphasis on the body, in conjunction with a lack of issues of the soul, a lack of development of the soul. For example, a lack of depth in salah, a lack of recitation of the Quran, a lack of the company of the righteous. These two things together then result in depression. And the sign of depression is that the soul no longer wants to do what it's supposed to do. It can no longer do what it can do. Okay, now, we have to step back to understand that. By nature, the body is created to do certain things, and by nature, the soul is created to do certain things. The body, it does whatever it's supposed to do by nature. Now, a normal body does what? A normal body should have the ability to walk 10 blocks, right? A normal human being at the age of the average person in this room has a definition of what it should be able to do, right? Now, for example, okay, I'm a physician. If a patient comes to me, they come to me with a complaint of something that they should be able to do or something that should be occurring that isn't there. For example, they come and they say, well, if I walk a few blocks or if I walk up the stairs, I get very, very tired. And that's not normal. Right? So then you work them up, you diagnose the fact that they may have some heart disease and that's why they're not able to walk as much as they normally walk. Right? So in that case, the reason why the body can't do what it's supposed to do is because there's an illness with the body. So the way by which people judge which people judge a problem with the body is by comparing and contrasting themselves to others, and then recognizing that there's a lack in their body as opposed to everyone else. Okay? Same thing with the soul. The soul, by definition, when it's not depressed, when it's in its healthy state, it loves to be nourished and to do things that are the tendency of the soul. For example, the dhikr of Allah. The soul loves to make the dhikr of Allah. Because that's by which it receives its nourishment. That's the action by which it receives its nourishment. The soul loves to pray. The soul loves the company of righteous people. It loves the company of righteous people. Alright? So that's the normal soul. The normal soul, when it's not being depressed, it has that natural tendency towards things of goodness. Okay? But if it gets depressed, then it becomes ill. And when it becomes ill, then the things that it normally should be doing, they begin to be lacking. For example, prayer becomes burdensome. Picking up the Quran, despite the fact that it's present on the shelf, becomes burdensome. Studying books of Islamic knowledge becomes burdensome. Keeping the company of the righteous becomes burdensome. Going to the masjid becomes burdensome. A human being will be able to go everywhere. They can go shopping, they can go visit their friends, but when it comes to these things, then it becomes burdensome. And that's a sign of the illness of the soul. Now, that's the first sign of depression. That's the first sign of depression. But then eventually that progresses so that the soul begins to shut the body down. First, the problem was with the soul. Right? It was not able to enter the environments of its own benefit. Eventually, it gets to a point where it shuts the body down. And then you find people, they say, well, I sleep all day, I don't feel like doing anything. Right? I just sit home all day, I don't feel like going anywhere. Right? I don't feel like eating anything. These are all clinical signs of what people call now in this society depression. And that's the extreme of the suppression of the soul. So much so that it begins to run over into the body as well. Now, so what are the cures to this? These are the signs of this illness. So what are the cures? The crux of the cure, okay, the central core of this issue, which results in the cure of this depression, is the company of righteous people. That's the essence. Okay, now someone came to me over the past week and they said, well, I made this schedule for myself of dhikr. And I made this schedule for myself of prayer. And I made this schedule of myself for these other things. But it's not allowing me to get out of this depression. I'm stuck in this depression. So then I said to the person, I said, well, but you do all these things, right? He said, yes. So I said, but what about the company of the righteous? Where is that? And that was lacking. And then I explained to that person that actually the essence of the cure is the company of the righteous. The essence of the cure is the company of the righteous. And that company occurs in 3 ways. And those 3 ways have to be in every person's life. Number 1, by coming to the masjid. You have to come to the masjid. Obviously, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mandated it for the salah within the sharia. According to most scholars, it's wajib. According to some scholars, it's fard. According to some scholars, the prayer does not even occur if you have the ability to be in the masjid. Some scholars have ruled that the prayer does not occur if you have the ability to be in the masjid, if it's not in jama'ah. So, coming to the masjid is essential aside from the necessity of being there for salah, but to be in the company of the righteous is essential in order to raise the soul. That's the first way, as far as company is concerned. The second is to come in the company of someone who you can discuss your issues of the soul with. Right? For example, when you have a physician and you have issues with the body, you go to the physician and you say, okay, I have A, B, C, and D problem. And then the physician says, okay, tell me about your life. What do you eat? Right? Do you exercise? What's your family history? And then they advise you based on that for your particular circumstance. Right? That doesn't preclude you from taking general benefit. You still pick up books about health, you still read articles about health, but that gives you specific guidance for your specific case. And so the same thing with the soul. You need to be able to interact with someone who has the experience of understanding the soul and its sicknesses, and understanding the sickness of the soul and its subsequent remedy. And that, for example, is the opportunity that lies before us, right? Now, Shaykh Zulfiqar is coming June 10th, June 11th. Right? We've planned this very elaborate program. We're putting all this emphasis into it. Why? Because actually he's a physician of the soul. He goes around the whole world discussing problems of the soul with each individual, and he has the unique experience of having met with hundreds of thousands of people to discuss issues of the soul. So for us, for such a person who has that deep experience of 20, 30 years of training his own soul, and then subsequent training of other people's souls, that provides an incredible opportunity for people who are seeking to rectify their souls to be able to sit with someone who understands rectification of the soul. That's the whole purpose of that gathering. That's the whole purpose in a nutshell. To gain that company and to be able to have the opportunity to sit with someone who has the experience of rectification of the soul. That's why we're putting so much emphasis into organizing it. Right? For all of us, because each of us has some level of deficiency. And he has the ability to pick up that deficiency and to subsequently assign you a cure for that deficiency. Allah gave him that tawfiq and Allah gave him that ability, and scholars all over the world, forget about us, scholars all over the world go and take their islah, take their medicine from him. So where do you think we lie? Right? So that's the other important aspect of company. 1, to be in the masjid with the company of the righteous. 2, to come in the company of teachers of the soul, of doctors of the soul. And 3, to sit in the company of the ulama. To sit in the company of the ulama. Whether that be in their talks, or whether that be by learning. And by learning, that's the highest state of sitting in the company of the ulama. And so that's why you'll see, right? We put so much emphasis on learning. Find someone in the community, begin to learn the Quran, begin to learn the Hadith. Whether that be the weekend Sharia program that all these brothers have been attending, and it's been going very well, or whether that be the full-time alim course, or whether that be the morning alim course that Qari Abdul Mannan offers, whatever IIE offers, etc. All of these are actually opportunities to keep the company of scholars. Because actually when you keep the company of the scholars, you're keeping company of the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah. Right? And when you keep the company of the Prophet ﷺ sunnah, that's what allows the soul to develop. That's what results in the fixation of the soul upon goodness. So, it's very important that these three things exist in each of our lives. One, that we're regular in the masjid and regular in the company of one another. And not only the people in this room, the community in general. Okay, that's one. Two, that we take advantage of the opportunities of the doctors of the soul. And three, that we take advantage of the ulama of the deen. Because they teach you the Quran and the Hadith, and the Quran and the Hadith is the prescription of the soul. It's the prescription of the soul. It tells you what benefits the soul and what harms the soul. And in fact, that was the definition of fiqh by Imam Abu Hanifa. What's for the soul and what's against the soul. What's for the body and what's against the body. That's how he used to define the term fiqh. Fiqh teaches you what's for the body and what's against the body, and what's for the soul and what's against the soul. So, these three things become the crux of the cure. You have to have these three. This is the center post, this company. And then surrounding that are the other deeds. So that when you're away from the company, the other deeds allow you to retain your state until you have the opportunity to enter the company again. So then your daily istighfar, your daily salawat, right? Your daily good deeds. All of these things then act as a shell and as a buffer and as nourishment when you're away from the company. But the core is the company. So you'll see that there are people, they lack deeds, but they have company. And when you have company, that results in a very, very permanent cure. And you'll see other people that have deeds, but they actually lack the company, and those people struggle. And in fact, that's exactly the history of the deen. Now you look at some of the Sahaba, they knew very little Quran. They knew 5 surahs, some 6 surahs, some 10 surahs, but they had the company of the Prophet ﷺ, and so they ended up coming under the shade of being the greatest community that ever walked on the face of the earth. Right? It wasn't about knowledge, it wasn't about the number of deeds, it was about the company of the Prophet ﷺ. They had that company, and then that company subsequently was embellished with deeds, but the company was the key thing. So, it really behooves people who are seeking to raise their soul that they keep these three things in mind. That they keep company in mind. Alright? Is 1, the masjid. 2, the company of our mashayikh. And 3, the company of our ulama. These three things are key. Now, then what allows you to then subsequently retain that benefit is 2 things. 1, doing good deeds. And 2, suppressing the desires of the body. 1, doing good deeds, and 2, suppressing the desires of the body. And then that becomes the definition of the rest of tasawwuf. Doing as much good as you can, and then focally suppressing your body at certain instances. For example, fasting Mondays and Thursdays. It's already built into the sunnah, but that acts to depress the body a bit, so that the soul has the ability to remain ever so slightly raised in relation to the body. Giving charity depresses the body. The nafs hates to give charity. You can tell a man, come and help me for an hour, they'll come and help you. You can assign someone to do something, but you ask them for money, then excuses start coming up. Oh, well, I really don't have enough money this month. So giving away money is one way by which the nafs is really knocked down. The nafs is sort of the CPU of the body, right? So issues of raising the soul, first the company is key, then the other issues of raising the soul, and then the subsequent issues of depressing the body. And all of that, in a nutshell, is tasawwuf. So if you find that there are signs of depression, right, and the earliest signs are a dislike for prayer, a dislike for the Quran, a dislike for the company of the righteous, right, whether that be in the masjid or through the mashayikh or with the ulama, then make it a habit and make it an emphasis in your life to work on company. And then add in these few deeds, and then add in those deeds that depress the body, and you'll begin to see that slowly that'll result in a very quick progress. It takes a while to get there, but then you're in 5th gear and you begin to progress rapidly. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be among those who have the ability to depress the nafs and have an ability to raise their soul.